And something Shelley's position was that perhaps, Milton was putting on a false face in being this extremely Christian individual, and that of course he couldn't be outwardly satanic because he would have been persecuted, and so to evade that he had this very Christian structure in Paradise Lost, but he really did have a lot of sympathy for the devil. I don't think history supports that. And I don't actually think it's as interesting as the Blakean reading, which is that Milton sort of lost control of his Frankenstein monster. That's more interesting because it shows the power of the poetic character, Satan.
It's a very old story in terms of, particularly, for example, people who write creatively in novels and so forth, is they say that the characters refuse to behave. You start a novel in a certain way and, it doesn't pan out the way you mean it to. And so that certainly happens. And I guess, and if you take the position, which I do, and I suspect you do as well, that the Bible is basically a work of fiction, and that these all, I think religion is basically it's a branch of the entertainment industry, which isn't too particularly, I'm not downplaying religion there so much as kind of trying to underline how significant the entertainment industry is in terms of, I think that the big difference with the Abrahamic religions, like with monotheism and so forth, was that they destroyed a view of the world that was much closer. I think we've rediscovered paganism, and not because we've got Wicca and the kind of various sort of New Age beliefs and so forth, but because we have like the temples of Hollywood. And so I think in however many thousand years ago, I think religion was very much like people looked up to these various pagan deities in the same way as people now look up to various celebrities. And so now somebody would think I don't know what would Arnold Schwarzenegger do, how would he react, how would Clint Eastwood react in this situation, that people back then would do the same with Thor or whatever else. And then that was wiped out. Monotheism sort of created this kind of much more sort of monochrome version of reality.
I do think that's significant to challenge also. It's not, Satanism isn't something that is exclusively anti-Christian or anti-orthodoxy. It also has to address culture at large.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I think of Satanism as a slaughterhouse for sacred cows. Whatever they might be. It's the counter-cultural aspect of it. So yes, you do find traditional religion being supplanted by things like celebritarianism.
Yeah.
And just accepting at face value whatever whoever's given a platform has to say. I think it's very important for Satanism to challenge that.
To be blasphemous towards this kind of orthodoxy as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's orthodoxy. It's authoritarianism.
Yes.
It's people on platforms thinking they have the authority to say we should do X, Y, and Z, or you ought to do X, Y, and Z. That's, I think, inherently problematic, that sort of thinking. And I think that's a large part of what the Satanic tradition is about.
Yes, it's a kind of... I think one thing that's different about Satanism to the vast majority of perhaps equivalent ideologies, philosophies, perspectives, I think I'm very reluctant to refer to it as a religion, but whatever.
Your religion, perhaps.
Yeah. I think that's fair enough. Is that it's not something. Almost every other version, almost every other ideology wants to draw everybody in, and Satanism doesn't. Satanism, there's a version of Satanism which I find, if I'm honest, slightly tedious, whereby they're always going about how selective they are and nobody can come in and whatever else. I'm not very interested in that. But on the other hand, the one which says, well, basically, this is how we see things, and as long as you respect that, we can get along. but we don't, I don't want you to think this way because people think differently. So Satanism is something which is kind of like unusual in being not exclusivist, but not expansionist.
It's a specific kind of elitist perspective, I would say, and I think that's a word that needs to be reclaimed in the lexicon. It has this very nasty connotation, in a democratic society. But again, it's going back to the refined radicalism idea.
Yeah.
That's important to the Miltonic Romantic tradition, and that is important because if something is trying to be all-inclusive, by definition, it can't be unorthodox. It can't be countercultural. And that's the backbone of what Satanism is. Again, going back to the Hebraic definition of the name, it means the adversary.
Yes.
The antithesis.
Yeah, sure.
So it can't be all-inclusive. It just doesn't make sense on any level. So I do think saying that, there's a certain sort of mindset or spirit that's at the heart of this thing, which serves as a yardstick, as something which determines whether or not someone is really a part of this, And again, we might overthink this because again, something with a sensational title as Satanism might take care of a lot of that work in terms of keeping certain people
yes
out of it.
and contrariwise also attract a lot of people who perhaps aren't so useful. I suppose throw a bit of a tangent, or not a tangent, but sort of a few sort of random thoughts in here. How about the idea of Satanism as a kind of an agent for change, as something which is whereby it's an inelegant way of putting it, but within a particular culture, let's say you have things, the pendulum has to move, yeah? And it's often very difficult to tell within that particular context whether this particular, I suppose, agent, individual, whatever, is a new evolution or a cancer. And so is Satanism this kind of thing, this kind of sort of throwing, a cog in? If I put one more metaphor in here, it's going to explode, isn't it? I'm not quite sure what I'm getting at here, but it's kind of like, if you're awkward, the importance of being awkward, the importance of being wrong.
I think what you're saying is that, again, as we just said, Satanism can't be something that wants to recruit as many people as possible, that wants to create a world full of Satanists. That just doesn't make sense. But what it can do, and what it is, I suppose, is something which challenges things in the most extreme of ways. And by doing that, creates the conversation. So it sort of bursts the doors open.
That's a large part of what I was saying. I think also,
I would say Satanism is perhaps the cultural explosion which, then allows, these other perspectives, say atheism, to then enter the conversation. Because not everyone's going to become a Satanist.
Yeah.
But because it's there, it's this thing.
It's a lightning rod.
It might open things up.
That's a large part of what I was saying. I suppose there was a part of that which is, again, trying to draw it back into a more personal level, whereby, you kind of feel like, you are drawn to these specific ideas, these specific aesthetics, and it does put you into problematic territory, in various different arenas. It could be, for example, on a family level, could be on an employment level, and you can sort of sit there and wonder exactly why am I the nail that's standing up? And I just think it's interesting that how does this happen? Why does this happen? And why do why would we keep at it? What's the point?